Emily Kohler. I'm the Director of Planning. I wanted to welcome all of you and thank you for attending our lunchtime community workshop for CityPlan. I'm seeing lots of familiar faces and people that have attended the other community workshops, and that was exactly how this process was intended to work. It's okay if this is your first one. I'm not saying that to make you feel bad that you didn't come to anything before that, but the idea was that this is a process. You can follow along and participate at each step, and then as you come back, you can see all the work that the community has done. So thank you for making time for this today. I am going to turn this over. If you've attended these before, you know that MIG, our consultant working on this project, is going to give a presentation. And that'll last 30 to 40 minutes or so. And then at that time, we'll break for the workshop, the interactive portion. So I know that you've had time to kind of look at the boards, but they'll make a lot more sense after you hear the presentation. And then I have a lot of support here today. So planning department people, if you can raise your hand and everyone look around the room so you can see who they're dressed up today. They're not wearing their planning department polo shirt, so you don't know who they are, but they're here to help you. And then I also just wanted to mention we have some of our city leadership here. Our new interim city manager is here listening in today, Andrew Freeman. And then our new deputy interim city manager, Laura Storrs, is also here too. So we appreciate your involvement and glad to have you. What am I missing?
That's it.
Okay. All right, Jay, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Emily. And thanks everyone for coming today. We're really excited to be sort of this far along in the process. If this is your first meeting, don't worry, we'll catch you up a little bit. And if you've been along for the ride, hopefully then you're seeing the progress we're making and seeing your comments and input reflected in what we're presenting today. The project team, I think most importantly, we're working closely with staff. We're engaging a lot of community members, a lot of stakeholders in this process. These meetings are really critical, but they're not the only avenue to provide input. We've been having focus groups, surveys, we have online activities. The city staff has been going out to neighborhoods, so we'll try to highlight some of those inputs as we move through. I'm with MIG, it's a consulting firm, and we do these types of plans all over Texas and frankly all over the country. And so we take a lot of pride in making sure that what we're coming up with is something that's really unique to that community. So it's been a pleasure getting to know you all, getting to know the community, and making sure that we're coming up with recommendations ultimately in this long-range plan that are true to the character, true to the unique qualities of Amarillo. We're supported by a good team looking at economic development and housing, thinking about how this might translate after the adoption of the plan to code updates and other kind of implementation tools, as well as transportation and infrastructure. So what we're going to do, we're going to provide you with a meeting update. We're going to go over the vision and guiding principles. It'll be actually our, I guess, second time presenting it in this format. But we've actually put those out there in a lot of different ways over the last probably 6 months. So we're feeling pretty good about that. Community connector meeting summary, which I may ask Emily to pop up for that. Base capacity and alternative scenario summary. That probably sounds like sort of foreign language to you, but I'll explain what that is. It's kind of thinking about how we grow in the future, where we want to focus growth and investment. And then importantly, we're kind of turning a corner, looking at plan elements and the recommendations. So city plan is an update to the city's comprehensive plan, which is something that the state of Texas actually requires for communities of a certain size. And so within that, there's something called plan elements. Those are in essence just topics that we want to cover in the comprehensive plan. And so for each topic, we want to have some goals, some key recommendations that are providing the policy direction for the city moving forward over the next 20 years. So we're basically addressing our first 5 plan elements today, floating out some initial recommendations and hoping to get your feedback. So process update, we actually kicked this process off last fall. with some sort of less formal inquiries, trying to get the lay of the land, understanding all of the things that had happened previously, more recent conversations around different developments, around the Parks and Rec plan, which we were actually fortunate enough to be a part of developing. That was adopted in 2021. But there's a lot of other planning efforts, a lot of other discussions around what should be happening, what shouldn't be happening around the community. So spending those first 2 phases really getting a handle on that and developing the vision and guiding principles, which I'll share in just a second. And then basically since the beginning of summer, and this will extend for another month or so, we're in this planning elements and recommendations phase. Importantly, we're going to be shifting towards implementation strategies. We actually had a couple meetings this morning where it was like, okay, this sounds pretty good, but how are you going to do it? So that'll be a key piece of the latter portion of our planning process. We're hoping to have a public review draft plan by the beginning of next year, and then that will go through a longer public review process and review and adoption process by Planning Commission and the Council. We've been meeting with a steering committee. We actually just last night had meeting number 6 with that group. And so we've been stepping through the process. They've been helping kind of dig deep into some of these topics. And then we're bringing all those different ideas and input out to you as well. So it's kind of an iterative process where the steering committee will have a conversation, provide some direction. We're articulating that, bringing it out to the community in a couple different formats, and then bringing that back to the steering committee to kind of digest, synthesize what we heard from the broader community. So the vision and guiding principles, one of the first things that we drafted specific to this effort. The community vision, important to note, I mentioned a 20-year plan. So by the time this is adopted, it'll be 2024. We thought 2044 plan didn't sound as good as 2045, so we decided to go out one more extra year there. So in 2045, Amarillo is a diverse, vibrant, and family-friendly community surrounded by wide open spaces that has reinvested in its original infrastructure, neighborhoods, and districts, and guided growth on its edges that have created amenities and opportunities for all Amarilloans. So there's a lot there to unpack. A couple of the key pieces I'd say would be thinking about family-friendly community. It's something that I think people look to Amarillo for already today. It's the reason people stay, the reason people move here, or consider it for a place to do business. And so what does that mean? Starting to sort of think about, okay, what makes a place family friendly? Well, it's walkability, it's safety, it's great parks and schools, it's having places to shop, places to work, and be able to provide for your family. So all those different pieces are part of the vision. Thinking about reinvestment, that is something that we've heard prior to this process in some community conversations, as well as during this process, is let's not only focus on the new stuff. Let's think about what already exists today, existing neighborhoods, existing commercial areas, our downtown, some of our larger employment areas, and how do we make sure that those continue to be a part of our future and we reinvest adequately in those places. And then the last piece around, in that first sentence, guiding growth on the edges, thinking about strategic investment. That's really making sure that we don't just keep growing and we kind of eat up the natural space around us. We want to utilize that land as effectively as we can, think about transportation infrastructure to support that, making sure that the public investment and the infrastructure is there to support the private investment that will occur. The second piece here is Amarillo is a regional economic and service hub and national destination that celebrates its small town charm, historic and cultural roots, and strategic location, with a unique mix of shopping, employment, housing, entertainment, parks, and open space. I'll point out small town charm, something we've heard a lot, the historic character, as well as having a mix of uses, all being really key to that. So we want to think about where we live, also where we work, where we shop, and where we go for entertainment and recreation. And we want to make sure that it's something that's really, of and for Amarillo, which means we're not going to look at Lubbock, we're not going to look at Dallas. We're not going to look at Houston or San Antonio or some of these other larger communities and say, oh well, they have this kind of development figured out, so we're just going to plop it down in Amarillo. No, we're going to make sure that we're doing something that's of this place for this place. And so that has to do with the scale of development, has to do with how we get around, what our preferences are, how different places should relate to each other. Which brings me to the guiding principles. So we have 6 guiding principles here. The first is creating a variety of walkable destinations. This idea that people are going to drive still. It is the Panhandle of Texas. It is a place where it's really hot in the summer, where it can be really windy. All right, like it's having or thinking that people are going to walk and bike or even take transit everywhere is a little naive. And so we want to create some options, of course, but more so it's this idea of when you get someplace by car or however else you decide to get there, can you actually walk around if you wanted to? So creating these kind of places where you could walk around. Next is housing opportunities. So really thinking about kind of broadening the range. What we've been hearing in the process is that we have a lot of single-family detached homes. That would be a sort of a typical neighborhood with a standalone home, its own yard, and then we have some larger apartment buildings, typically kind of with parking lots around them, kind of walk-up apartment buildings. Both great products, but what about all the stuff in between? So thinking about duplexes and triplexes, thinking about accessory dwelling units or carriage homes, that sort of thing, tiny homes, cottage units, as well as townhomes and smaller apartment buildings. So where are those appropriate? Are they appropriate everywhere? What we're hearing is no, they're not. It's really kind of a neighborhood by neighborhood approach that we want to be taking. But there is this appetite for kind of broadening the range of options that are available within Amarillo. Prioritizing reinvestment in not just the neighborhoods and districts, but in our infrastructure and recreational amenities, encouraging a diversity of low to medium places, or scale places, throughout the city. So that's that idea of creating some hubs of activity. Right now, that tends to be our commercial areas. And I've done it myself. I've seen other people, talk to people who are doing it. You go someplace, and even if it's in the same big parking lot, a lot of times you get in your car and drive to the next storefront. And so again, could we retrofit some of these commercial areas to create more walkable amenities and more walkable places from neighborhoods? Increasing overall quality of life, which has to do with clean and safe and protected neighborhoods, as well as our parks and open spaces and goods and services. And finally, cultural and historic assets, particularly celebrating those along our key corridors and in specific neighborhoods and districts. Emily, did you want to give a little highlight?
I can do that, yeah. So I see some of our community connectors here, which is great. That means it worked. So this was an effort that we started a couple months ago to try to reach people from every part of Amarillo. And so you saw the map, I think, when you came in. We divided the city into 58 different smaller scale geographies, and our goal is to have at least one person from each of those give us really detailed feedback. And so we invited people who had participated in the process. They had taken the survey or come to another meeting. They came to a lunch and learn where we walked through the map changes for their area, and then they were armed with information so that they could go back, visit with their friends and neighbors. And so some of you may have came today for that reason, because one of your neighbors had talked to you. And this was some of the feedback that we got from those detailed conversations. I think it just kind of affirms the direction that we were already heading in. And I think that, like, if you're kind of new to city plan, we'll explain what mixed use means as we get a little further into the presentation. But there was a strong preference for the idea of adding mixed use districts in Amarillo. The need for more diverse housing options, specifically that mixed use idea, like residential over retail on the ground floor, townhomes or small apartment complexes. People seem to really like the idea of tiny homes as another affordable, maybe senior housing option. We asked questions about housing, stock, and condition, and generally people felt like the housing condition in Amarillo overall is good, but we definitely heard from our older neighborhoods about the need to focus there, which is consistent with other feedback we've gotten through the process. And then there was a really strong interest in connectivity, both within subdivisions and external, like people trying to get to places outside of their neighborhood. And so part of what you're going to be able to do today is we have 29 of our 58, so we're exactly halfway. Part of what the intent of this community workshop is that if you want to review your map and go through this exercise, we would love to have you do that. We're still missing about half the city. And so Shari, who you probably met when you came in, she is kind of managing this, and the neighborhood map is over there. And so this is also kind of a plug that we would love that feedback today while you're here. Yeah, I think that's good. Thanks
so much, Emily. All right, so I talked about these scenarios earlier. One of the things that the charge is in the comprehensive plan for any community is to think about what growth is projected for that community, and then how and where you would accommodate that growth. So that has to do with jobs, because then that informs where commercial development would go, industrial developments, where places where people work, as well as where homes would go. So what we did is we looked at the state of Texas. There's a state demographer. It's actually through the finance department. They projected out for the region. We looked at Amarillo's kind of share of that growth historically, of the region's growth, and kind of just projected that out over this 20-year period coming up through 2045. And so the targets are in the upper right there. About 50,000 new residents, again, over the next 21, 22 years. That then translates to a need for about 27,000 new jobs and 22,000 new housing units. On the left-hand side is sort of where we're at today. It's a little high. This is based on some GIS data and things that we had available. But right about 210, 215,000 people, about 90,000 dwelling units. You can see the distribution, with kind of the larger lot, detached single family is what that means, in that third row down in gray on the left. So about 60,000 of the existing 90,000 dwelling units are single family detached homes. So when people are saying they want some variety, I can see why. That's not uncommon in our communities to have most of the most of the dwelling units be in these kind of houses. But people want to see some more small lot homes, which is about 11,000 today. Some attached single family, so those are duplexes, triplexes, townhomes. We only have about 3,600 of those today. And multifamily being about 15,000 of that overall 90,000. Employment is currently around 90,000, which they tend to kind of line up, the dwelling units and the employment. I'll come back to the capacity scenario in a second. So the alternative scenario, what we did is a kind of a process, and we looked at a few different things that kind of led us to this. First, what we did is we looked at the zoning that exists today, and we wanted to see, okay, if everyone just took advantage of the zoning that exists today on their parcel, developed to the maximum capacity of the zoning, does that provide us with enough capacity to get to those projections, to accommodate the 55,000 new people overall? And the answer was yes, absolutely. If everyone maximized the development potential of their property based on the existing zoning, we could actually accommodate double the residents, probably triple or even quadruple the employment. But in reality, most people are going to stick with what they've got. There's nice homes, there's nice buildings. It costs a lot, if there's even an existing building that needs some work, to take that down and then build a new building. So we started to look at, well, where were the vacant parcels? Where were the underutilized parcels? And so that led us to this areas of change overlay. So any of the parcels in color, not including, this is grayscale, so these are not changing. So it's the yellows, the oranges, the purples, there's light blues on here. And all the things that you're seeing, especially the maps and things, they're going to be on the boards around the room. So if you want to take a closer look, you can. But these are basically sitting on vacant or underutilized parcels today. And so those are the places where we're also then suggesting maybe there's a shift in what could happen in the future. So largely what you're seeing is more purple and more of the kind of darker yellows. Those translate to neighborhood high and neighborhood medium areas. Even the high, we're not talking 16 stories or anything like that. It would be a maximum kind of 5 to 8 stories in a couple of spots, but more so in the 3 to 4, 5 range. Neighborhood medium being kind of the lighter yellow, and then those purples representing mixed use. And Emily promised you that I would explain what mixed use is for those of you who don't know. So it can be horizontally mixed, meaning that you could have maybe it's a small apartment building next to a commercial property, a store or a couple of stores, something like that. It could be a store next to an office. That would technically be a mix of uses. They're both commercial, but different types of commercial uses. Or it could be vertically mixed, meaning in a singular structure in a building, and you see a lot of this in downtown today. There's a store maybe on the ground floor, and then there's offices or residents above. So looking for more of those opportunities where we can have a mix of things, because those tend to be more active places, have more opportunities for people to live, work, and play. So that's where those little kind of spots of purple are showing up on the map of different scales. Either I'm highlighting a few of the bigger ones, but there's a lot of kind of smaller ones at key intersections kind of sprinkled throughout. So as we were testing the ideas of different types of places, what people would like to see near their neighborhoods, what they were saying is we want places to walk to. And we want either commercial areas or mixed use places that have this activity in closer proximity to us. So that's the idea of creating more smaller kind of mixed use and commercial places that are more distributed. There's more of them in more places around Amarillo. This is the full complete neighborhood scenario map then. So this is adding all the colors. All the other colors that just came on the map, and I can go back and forth. So those are the colors where things would be changing. All those colors would be places that already exist, but we're still providing some guidance on how those could be more walkable, providing some more flexibility to make sort of development and good development easier to do, and ultimately something that really supports the existing neighborhood. So that's a complete neighborhood scenario map. As Emily had pointed out, we have detailed printouts of those maps at a neighborhood scale, because it is tough to read kind of citywide, we acknowledge that. We do have the citywide map though also in the back corner that you can look at and provide comments on. So I said I'd come back to this slide. We kind of flipped this now. The base scenario is on the right, the complete neighborhood scenario is on the left. So we've created enough capacity with this scenario, just with those kind of spot changes, to accommodate the projected growth in population, jobs, and housing units, and really increase the diversity of housing options as well. And again, this is just the potential for these. As you know, we don't need to add, we don't need to jump from 90,000 to 170,000. So that would be an 80,000 unit growth. We really only need 22,000 new housing units. So this is just creating the opportunity for more variety within that. All right, the undeveloped land piece. So this is where I was saying most likely new development would happen with either agricultural land, vacant land, or underutilized property. And so that's what's showing up on here. We have this on one of the boards as well, right in the back. So there's a lot of little yellow parcels in the kind of the core, as well as what these kind of bigger red and orange or yellow parcels that you're seeing. So there's still a general opportunity, and I think within even the city limits without annexation, to fill in around the edges. And we just want to make sure that that's done in a really good way that is supporting the existing neighborhoods. But we also don't want to neglect a lot of the vacant parcels, the holes, sometimes we call it the missing teeth within the kind of neighborhood fabric in our existing neighborhoods. So it's sort of a balanced approach looking out over the next 20, 21 years. This is the colors on the undeveloped land. So this was sort of what we used to do those takeoffs in terms of the numbers that we could accommodate, which brings us here, where we actually did one step further and we looked at floodplain parcels, looking at if we included floodplain. Well, that's not really realistic to expect all that, and maybe not even responsible to do that. So we excluded that, and we were still able to accommodate those targets. So, or not even targets, sorry, they're really projections. All right. So, as I said, we're going to sort of turn our attention to beginning to talk about recommendations today. So we have much more detail, and well, it's actually the same information that's in here, but I'm not going to go through every line item in here. We'll let you read that. We have staff that'll be around to answer questions. But I wanted to give you a little highlight of this. So one of our major sections of the plan is land use and community character. So here we wanted to think about, well, what is our current direction? There is a comprehensive plan for Amarillo already that was adopted in 2010. So we looked back at that, and some of the things actually still hold true in terms of the bigger picture direction that was talked about. Having harmonious patterns of development. Well, we've heard a lot about compatibility. We've heard a lot about sort of transitions from one place to the next, or one land use to the next. And so that still holds. Continued development of quality residential neighborhoods. Well, we're evolving that idea a little bit from what was called the neighborhood unit concept to complete neighborhoods. So this idea that neighborhoods can be a little more diverse, that there can be some flexibility in there as long as the character is staying consistent. And so we can have more places for people to walk to, more connectivity between neighborhoods and places. There's an emphasis on creating a premier medical center, which I think has largely been achieved and is underway since the plan was adopted. Commercial development along corridors generally, but along the Sansi corridor was highlighted back in 2010. Revitalization of downtown, and then really thinking about economic development opportunities around the airports. And so we kind of think all of those still hold true in addition to these issues and needs that were identified, which was thinking about some of the older parts of town and how do we reinvest, thinking about, we have zoning as well as development on the ground that really mixes industrial and residential, particularly in our older parts of the community. So how do we begin to set a direction that sort of stabilizes the neighborhoods, also creates clear opportunities for employment and economic development. A desire for extensive infill, so that was all those little missing teeth I was talking about. Continuing to conserve our development patterns and impacts in the vicinity of the area's playa lakes, and then further exploration of consensus strategies to reduce excessive use of signs, which cause site restriction and urban clutter. We haven't heard a whole lot of that in this conversation over the last year, but aesthetics, brand identity is still a priority in this effort. So some of those key planning themes that we're bringing forward: strong neighborhoods, thinking about revitalization of older areas, protecting our economic anchors, and community aesthetics and image. We've really tried to build on in this effort. There was a lot of community conversation that went into that last plan, and while some of the tools didn't quite work out or maybe sort of lost favor over time, we want to build on some of those major concepts. And so in the land use category, there's 4 major goals. Promote complete neighborhoods protected from but connected to nearby districts and corridors. So that impacts some of the things that we'd think about on the heels of adopting a plan like this. Thinking about compatibility, thinking about how do we facilitate some of that kind of smaller neighborhood scale mixed use, creating more walkable places. So all of these different bullets, the recommendations on the bottom part of the slide, are on our boards, and we invite your feedback on those as we break into the small group discussions. We're really wanting to build on that with sort of this idea of the patterns of development. And so we want to protect residential areas, preserve our light industrial areas, but create some sort of a buffer and transition between the two. So you'll see that on the map, whether you look at the neighborhood scale, kind of zoomed in ones, or the citywide map. In our existing newer neighborhoods, so these are neighborhoods developed over the last decade or couple of decades, what we generally have is that neighborhood unit concept, which is kind of the quarter section with commercial on the corners, a park kind of nestled within each one, but kind of never the two shall meet kind of situation. And so it's tough to get from a residence here to the commercial here, which you might want to go to. So you get in your car, you go out to the street, drive over here, drive over here, drive over here. And so we're creating a lot of cars on the road, we're creating pollution as a part of that, but most importantly, we're kind of making it a challenge to get to the stuff that's closest to you. So how do we improve that? Thinking about development, thinking about connectivity improvements, and thinking about creating some mixed-use places nestled within or near our neighborhoods. And then lastly, thinking about newer development patterns, as just showed on the larger map, some of those opportunities are most of them are focused sort of on the west and the south, a little bit to the north along the loop. And so as that is coming online, as we're thinking about newer development out there, how are we making some of these mixed-use places and making sure that we're transitioning between the two to make sure we're protecting the integrity of those places. Second goal around land use and community character would be revitalize older neighborhoods and commercial corridors. So this would have to do with adjusting the zoning, thinking about development standards, looking at continuing to develop neighborhood plans where we do a more focused look on a smaller geography and implementing those, and then implementing some of this kind of missing middle housing, some of those housing types that aren't sort of on either end of the spectrum, as well as mixed use along some of our corridors. Third goal is protect economic anchors in strategic employment areas. So this would have to do with retaining some of those larger areas for employment, whether the uses exist today or we want to attract a larger manufacturer, a larger office tenant, maybe an educational campus wants to open a second location or expand, and then creating some housing opportunities nearby. And the fourth goal in land use and community character is to promote community aesthetics and image. So here we're thinking about design guidelines and standards, thinking about encouraging facade improvements in existing structures, whether those be homes or commercial development, thinking about our priority gateways, how are people entering the community, moving through the community, and what is the impression that we're giving? Is it an impression of a place you'd want to live, that you'd want to do business, that you'd want to visit, or are we not providing that sort of proper entry experience? We have some housing recommendations, and so there's three goals there. Provide opportunities for greater diversity of housing options. You'll see in the recommendations talking about some options to really create more opportunity to introduce different housing sizes, scales, locations, and hopefully price points, really promoting affordability, which brings me to the second goal. Ensure Amarillo residents and the regional workforce have access to affordable housing options. Most people, I think, are of the mind that Amarillo is relatively affordable today, but we're seeing what's happening in a lot of other places around Texas, around the country, and how do we retain that great quality that we have and make sure that everyone can afford to own a home if that's something they choose or have an affordable rent. And then the third goal is use a targeted approach to facilitating neighborhood revitalization and encouraging infill housing in existing neighborhoods. So again, we have good standards. We're going to be sort of looking at that for new neighborhoods, and we know that that'll be a big part of the solution to accommodating that housing growth and population growth moving forward. But what about our existing neighborhoods? How do we really facilitate quality infill, quality investment in terms of the infrastructure, utilities, how we get around, and the parks and recreation as well? Economic development has three goals as well. Supporting the growth of the region's economic strengths to expand economic opportunities for residents. So really looking at targeted industries for both large scale businesses and development opportunities, as well as small scale entrepreneurs and small businesses that we'd like to support to help fill some of the vacancies we have today, but as well as some of those new opportunities we'd be creating in kind of the neighborhood mixed use or neighborhood main streets that we'd like to see throughout the community. Growing Amarillo as a leading community for applied education and workforce development, so partnering with the schools at all levels, K through 12 as well as higher education, thinking about creating a great quality of life to attract great employers or employees, and utilizing economic development tools. And the third is invest in recreation and growth of a variety of economic places. So this is really thinking about, again, sort of the land use and the development pattern that we want to see across the community, and how do we kind of keep with the times. There's an evolution of how and where different types of uses want to locate, whether that's a big distribution center or a brewery or a restaurant that's serving families. Mobility recommendations, wanted to point out that we're building on a lot of recent work, looking at the Partnership for Development Progress, which looked at existing facilities, deferred maintenance around the community, how we're paying for infrastructure. So really integrating that into our process. Looking at the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, which helps to distribute federal funding around the region. And so looking at their plans, looking at their criteria for projects, making sure Amarillo is competitive for those. Looking at the multimodal mobility plan, building on these overall principles, knowing that people are going to continue to drive, but looking at incremental changes that may be possible in supporting the complete neighborhood concept. How are we connecting people from neighborhoods to commercial areas along some of our major arterials and making crossings way safer? That's a lot of what we heard, is that it's pretty easy, even in the older parts of the community, getting around within the neighborhood, a few blocks in the residential areas it's pretty good. It's when you try to go to then the shop nearby, or you want to get to the grocery store, or maybe even just the school that may not be within your neighborhood, where it's unsafe, where it's uncomfortable, where there may even be a lack of pedestrian facilities altogether. So moving forward with some of those. So looking at that complete neighborhoods map, we have a couple of recommendations addressing walkability, particularly at major intersections. So a few ideas of how to do that you'll see on the boards, which these boards are right over here on the left-hand side. Ensuring high-quality pedestrian infrastructure. So as we're making investments in our roads and streets and overall connectivity, making sure that we're thinking about pedestrians and bicyclists. Again, not everywhere. We're not thinking that people are going to make cross-town trips on foot. But again, in these kind of localized places, particularly in connecting to where people live, how do we make strategic investments there? And then implementing better sidewalk connectivity to and through commercial areas, and enhancing sidewalk connectivity to parks and schools, we heard as a big priority as we had prior conversations with neighborhoods, with focus groups, and a previous round of community conversations. Last one here, parks and cultural resources. There are some key issues and needs identified in the comp plan that was done in 2010. Again, a lot of these kind of carry forward in terms of looking at investing in our parks that exist already, really thinking about environmental quality, the Playa Lakes, thinking about hike and bike connections to those parks. Some of the planning themes were, building on the existing strong park system. It's a source of pride for the community, but how do we make sure it stays that way and maybe even becomes more of one? Looking at local heritage initiatives, so historic assets, thinking about cultural kind of amenities and stories that we can be telling. And then the bottom part of this slide are community priorities from the 2021 Parks and Recreation Master Plan. So echoing a lot of those things that we heard in the previous planning effort, but setting some new direction in terms of where we might invest in our parks. So those of you who are familiar with the 2021 plan know that there's an idea of being able to take care of what we have means we might have to sort of revise or rethink our approach to some of our parks. So the smallest scale neighborhood parks over the last couple of decades have we've packed in the same level of amenitization, same level of investment as a lot of our larger parks. And so what that means is we're having to travel from park to park. There's dozens and dozens of small neighborhood parks, and bringing that equipment, lots to maintain, and frankly, the city can't afford to keep up with it, even with an increased level of investment in park maintenance and operations. So trying to scale that back a little bit so that we can, in fact, take care of what's in the parks. Looking at then maintaining what's in our larger neighborhood parks and investing in our larger community parks, special use sites, and regional parks, particularly as the population grows. So what are some of those tools and kind of mechanisms we can put in place to make sure that new development is helping to invest in our existing parks, not just setting aside land for new parks? So the recommendations there, last slide here on the recommendations, is to implement Parks and Recreation Master Plan, looking at our park dedication requirements, thinking about how we could be more flexible with that. So we're not just getting small neighborhood parks kind of nestled within a subdivision, but that we're also thinking about plazas, streetscapes, connectivity with trails and other hike and bike facilities getting to parks and recreation. increasing programming events in downtown and other community mixed-use places, promoting community and neighborhood mixed-use development near all parks, but in particular near our regional parks where we have the largest opportunities, and then better celebrating and leveraging our historic assets, including the Route 66 historic corridor. So again, that was meant to be a little kind of preview and overview. Around the room, we have all these boards up front, over near the American flag. We have sort of an overview of what city plan is, and then the vision and guiding principles. As I said, we've vetted that a lot over the last 6 months, but if you have ideas there, we still are welcoming those. So at all of our different boards, we have Post-it notes, pens, there's sticker dots, because some of them require that, which would bring me over here. Here's the economic development recommendations and goals. So let us know what you like, what you don't like, what you think is ho-hum, and if you have particular ideas to adjust, add, or subtract from those, we'd welcome those. The middle portion over here, just in front of the camera, is the mobility recommendations and map. So we're looking at specific places you'd like to see different types of investment. There's little stars you can put on that map, as well as thoughts and comments on the recommendations. The back corner, over to my left, your right, is the scenario station. So that talks about the different places, the map of those, as well as how we derived those, looking at vacant parcels and agricultural parcels. And then in the back right, we have recommendations for land use and community character, as well as housing. We have a visual preference board, meaning there's photos on there, and we'd like to hear different types of housing that you think are appropriate and potentially where. And then finally, and we pointed this out earlier, but just a reminder, we have the neighborhoods or neighborhood geography map with some zoom-ins of the scenario map. So if you want to really dig deep and provide comments on your neighborhood or a neighborhood you're really familiar with, maybe it's where you work or where you grew up, something like that, we'd invite that input as well. And there'll be staff around to help you with all of that. We do have a meeting just like this evening. That's at the Northwest Library from 6 to 8 p.m. We'll be doing the exact same presentation, the same boards, so you don't necessarily need to come again, although you are definitely welcome. We definitely hope that you could tell some other folks about it. Hopefully we can get a great turnout this evening, just like we got today. We then have more community connector lunch and learns. That would be something that you could talk to Shari about if you want to help to get plugged into that, maybe have a conversation in your neighborhood. We'll be doing then additional steering committee meetings, which are just kind of key milestones in the process, in November, December, January, looking at implementation tools and strategies, as well as the draft plan. There will be a community draft plan developed and posted, so even beyond these meetings that we're doing and focus groups and the community connector meetings, there'll be an opportunity to look at the overall plan document and provide comments on that before it goes through the formal review and adoption process. So with that, I think we want to make sure that you're thinking about these key questions as you go around the room. I'll pause and just see if there's any kind of clarification questions, but if it's kind of getting deeper, providing comments, we'd really want you to do that in the open house format. But as you're moving around, and I did see one hand pop up, so we'll get that comment in a second. We want you thinking about, are there preliminary recommendations that should be edited or eliminated? So that would be on the boards are on mobility, on economic development, housing, land use, and community character. Are there some of those bullets that you just think are missing the mark, some that need to be edited? Second bullet here is, are there things that are missing? Are we covering some of the topics but not all the topics that need to be addressed? What are maybe some of the top 2 or 3 recommendations in terms of the priority and the impact that they'd have in the community? And then finally, thinking about those draft recommendations, how might we measure success? It's great to have a plan, but 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, how do we know if we've accomplished that? So maybe thinking a little bit around there, we'd love some of your input. But I saw in the back a high hand shoot up. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, in one of the early slides, you had a maximum section of maximum.
The capacity? Yeah.
Yeah, capacity.
Yep.
Was that just what if, because you said you go back to that, but that never resurfaced, and you don't need to go back to those slides?
Yeah.
Is that just if things.
So
really
based on what is, so the zoning on a property, any given property within the city of Amarillo. Basically says what you can do with that property in terms of the uses, as well as how much development you could put, how big the building could be, how big the footprint of that building could be. So we went through an exercise to see if everyone developed to the maximum capacity allowed within zoning, what that would do, and it was a huge number. And then we said, okay, well that was a fun exercise, but let's get more realistic, and let's think about most of what exists today will stay in place. So how might we, whether it's through maybe infill on an existing property where they have, it's a really big parcel and there's some development and still something else could go there still, might be realistic, that would be underutilized or underdeveloped. But also looking at vacant parcels and things like that. So that's where I was just kind of letting you know the overall process, but it was a step that we took. Good clarification question, yes.
So which board would I go to recommend to have our dumpsters be put back in our alleys?
I would probably go to the housing boards for that. Might be a good way to do that. So related to our neighborhoods. Those are right next to the land use and community character as well, which has to do with community character too, right? The aesthetic of having dumpsters not in the alleys. Yeah. Any other clarification questions before we break?
Just
Yeah.
no
Sir.
amusement parks, no water parks, no things like that. You haven't suggested any of that. I mean, parks are great.
Yeah. So those would be allowed within certain places and within. What was the last thing you said?
I was just saying, amusement parks employ people. It's nice to have a park and everything else.
Yeah.
But we're looking for employment so we can fill.
Yeah, we're also not calling out specific types of stores. We're not calling out, specific types of offices or manufacturing. So this plan flies a little higher than that. So amusement parks and things. At this point, you're right that we're not suggesting the city as the entity develop those. All those things would be allowed within the existing scenario, within certain types of
Amusement parks,
places.
50 miles radius of Amarillo.
Within 50-mile radius of Amarillo? No, we're only looking within the ETJ, the extraterritorial jurisdiction of Amarillo. So it's the existing city footprint and sort of the immediate
And
surroundings.
so the reason I'm saying that is because I understand we have a grandfather contract with the Wonderland Park, and that's why we don't have any amusement parks or anything within a 50-mile radius.
Okay. I don't know the details of that agreement, but I'm sure there's staff around the room that could talk to you about that. We'd definitely invite that comment. Any other clarification questions?
What about the homeless? Does that come under housing or?
Yes, yeah, I would say in the housing section, and I think it's probably an area, when you look at the boards, we're a little silent right now. We haven't heard much in the community conversation about that yet, but if you have thoughts, we definitely invite you to provide those on the boards.
And then also, is there any consideration of separately what Canyon's vision is and how the two relate as our sister community?
Yeah, so we actually have one of the, I mentioned plan elements or topics. One of those is intergovernmental sort of coordination and cooperation. And so we'll be having some conversations with some of the nearby jurisdictions to make sure that we're sort of, as this plan is kind of formulating, that it's jiving with what's happening nearby. That's a really good point. The regional kind of conversation and connectivity is really important. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Are you guys discussing the both positive and negative aspects of STRs, short-term rentals?
We have not so much to date. That it is a policy direction that we could speak to in the plan. Typically what communities do in a comprehensive plan though is focus on the kind of the built product, the number of dwelling units and the types of dwelling units. Short-term rentals is actually a policy around how you can use those, or regulation ultimately, but how you use different types of units, because it could be a single family detached home, it could be an apartment, it could be a tiny home.
Definitely, addressing that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's important, particularly as we think about some of the newer options of housing. We've seen in some communities, if that goes sort of unchecked, that you get some new housing types, but it all goes, or maybe not all, but a lot goes to short-term rental and kind of defeats the purpose. So I think it's good you bring it up.